So when we're talking about the reverse crunch, I think it's important to think of it as just that, a reverse crunch, and the movement is essentially identical, but instead of thinking about bringing your rib cage down to your pelvis, we're going to be thinking about bringing our pelvis up to our rib cage. But how we do it and the principles remain the same. And what I mean by that is we're going to use something like an ab mat, which I would go as far as to say is a non-negotiable if you really want to get a lot out of this. Or you can roll up some towels or a sweatshirt, but what we need to do is we need to lengthen the abs. Just like every muscle we want to grow on the body, we want to expose it to a long length. We want to stretch it under tension. And so the best way to do that is to use something like this ab mat where I can actually extend through the spine and lengthen in the rectus abdominis and your six-pack muscles. And so you kind of need to have something under here. If you want to do it just flat, that's fine. You can still do the movement, and if you don't train a lot of abs, for a while, this is still going to be challenging, but I do recommend picking up one of these. It's called an ab mat on Amazon. This is not a special one. There's a million of them, not expensive. If you care about training abs, actually a pretty decent purchase right here. So we're going to work on three main things today. The first is not using a ton of momentum out of the bottom that your hip flexors take over. Now, I like working hip flexors and all, and if the hip flexors are working a little bit, it's not the end of the world, but we don't want to take off all of the tension from the abs and put it all on the hip flexors. And so what I want you to focus on is not using a bunch of momentum and flinging your legs up. And so this, where you're kind of like just jerking your legs up, is going to be almost entirely hip flexors, right? So we're going to work on not flinging our legs up. That kind of bleeds into the second point, it's kind of synonymous, which is initiating the lift slowly. So when you get into the stretched position here at the bottom, right here, where my abs are really lengthened, really stretched, instead of flinging myself up, right, I want you to think about picking up your pelvis and tucking it up into your rib cage nice and slow. And the nice and slow part is how you make this hard. That's what she said. Okay, here. Get as much lengthening as I can, really feel that stretch. Think about pulling my pelvis up into my rib cage and then back down. Now, as you can see, I'm not going up very high, right? I'm not doing this. The minute my knees cross over being, let's say, perpendicular with the floor, there's no more tension on the abs, right? There's no more tension on the abs. And so a lot of times we have the urge to do too much range of motion on the way up because that's what we see on social media, or that's what we think is good. We think more range of motion is always good, but at that point, you will feel it if you start to pay attention that as your knees come over here, yeah, this is a rest. I can hang out here all day. And so I'm okay with the fact that it's going to be a small range of motion because that's where there's actually tension. And again, that's looking like And so that was the third one, which is don't use too much range of motion. So don't fling your legs up, bring them up nice and slow, and don't use too much range of motion on the way up that you're getting a big rest. Now, if you feel pretty strong at these and you're able to do many reps, 15, 20, 25 reps, and it's still not feeling super hard, what we can do is we can get more lengthening. And the way you do that is one of two ways. If you have a fancy bench where the seat goes down, you can do that, and you can move the ab mat to the end here. Or if you don't have a fancy bench that can put the seat down, keep your seat flat and just move the ab mat to the end of the bench. And I'll show you what that looks like. Let me make sure I'm in the camera here. And what'll happen now is I can actually lengthen a bit more, and you'll see right here where my tailbone would have normally hit the ground here or the bench, it's not, and I can lengthen just that little bit more beyond where the bench would have been. Notice I'm keeping my knees bent, no straight legs yet. Right here. And I gotta tell you, my abs are gonna be torched from just demonstrating this. And so remember, it's just like a crunch. We are looking to lengthen over something like this so we can lengthen the abs. We're not using a lot of momentum on the way up, or in this case on the way up from the hip pelvis up. And we're not using so much range of motion that it's a rest. Remember, if you do a crunch, just a regular crunch, this right here is a rest, right? It's not 100% a rest, but it's mostly a rest. In the same way that when I bring my knees up to my chest, at some point it's a rest. But if we're doing a crunch, if I keep that movement nice and small, I can keep tension on the abs throughout, and we can actually make this challenging.